And we are back on the Zero Hour. I'm Richard RJ Eskow, and joining us now is Andrew O'Hare, who is a staff writer at Salon.com. Does a lot of film reviews, but also writes on a variety of topics, sometimes taking off from a film, sometimes just political stuff, including a lot of writing lately on Trump. But we're here to talk a little more about animals and what is sometimes described as the rights of non-humans, non-human persons, as that phrase has been used. So he wrote a great piece for Salon recently called asking the question, are animals persons or just cute objects capitalism can save? Animal rights enter an interesting new era. Andrew, thanks for coming on the program.
Hey, thanks for having me. It's my pleasure.
Great. Now, listen, your piece basically explored the animal rights issue, working off a new book and a new documentary. So if you would just for a second tell us about both of those.
Yeah, it's very interesting because there is a documentary by the veteran team of Chris Hegedus and D.A. Pennebaker, a married couple who go all the way back to the 1960s making documentaries. The film is called Unlocking the Cage, and it is about it's in theaters now and will probably reach home video pretty soon, but it is about the legal movement, mostly about this lawyer named Stephen Wise and his group, the Non-Human Rights Project, it's called. It's the attempt to explore the idea that certain higher animals, certain more intelligent animals, may have rights of what is called personhood under the law. It sounds incredibly contradictory, but the idea is that we've already got laws. The concept of person under the law is not the same thing as a human being, and there are lots of examples of this, including Citizens United, amusingly enough. And so the question is, do animals such as chimpanzees or whales or elephants that we know to be intelligent and believe to have a consciousness which may not be terribly different from ours, do they have certain rights, not the same rights as human beings, but certain rights that can be defined under the law? So that's one side of it. And then there's also this interesting book by a guy named Wayne Pacelli, who's the director of the Humane Society of the United States, which is called The Humane Economy. And he's making a completely different argument, which is that the sort of newfangled capitalist economy of innovation and entrepreneurship and all these things that he's in favor of will ultimately benefit animals because what consumers want is less animal cruelty, and that, the market will eventually, well, not eventually, the market is now responding to this, and we're going to see more and more of this into the future. And in fact, he's done a lot of great work. I maybe sound like I'm a little sarcastic about that, but Pacelli has done all kinds of things to put this into practice. So I thought the contrast between these two sort of philosophical approaches, which are really different, but both aimed at kind of, reducing the amount of human cruelty to animals, I thought that was really interesting.
No, it's fascinating, and they do make two good contrasts. I had one of the lawyers who works with Stephen Wise on the program about a year ago or so, talking about the case in New York of a chimpanzee who was being held in inhumane conditions.
Yes.
And they sued, and as you point out in your piece, this was the Non-Human Rights Project. I think that chimpanzee has been transferred to another jurisdiction anyway. But to me, I look at these. First of all, I guess, I'm curious to know your personal feelings, Andrew O'Hare, because, I was vegan for like a year and a half. And now when I eat meat, I feel a little bit like I'm morally Thomas Jefferson. You know what I mean? Like I know Jefferson, I feel in his heart, knew that keeping slaves was wrong, but he did it. In my heart, I feel like I know what I'm doing is wrong, but I do it. I do feel that animals have inherent rights as beings. I don't know. Where do you stand on that?
I absolutely agree, and that animals have some form of inherent rights, and I think that as human society, we have to figure out what we think those are. Clearly, the concept of personhood, it's an awkward fit because we assume that word refers to a human being, and in the past, it usually did. The point that the lawyers are making is, there are all these cases. In India, different Hindu religious idols have been classified as persons under the law. In a case, in an indigenous rights case in New Zealand, a river was classified as a person. In the United States, corporations can be persons under the law. So if we're going to expand the definition, then who is to say that a whale or a chimpanzee is not a person in that sense? I don't know whether that's the right fit or not, because to a lot of people it feels like a cognitive dissonance, like it doesn't make sense. But I absolutely think that we're on the way to figuring out that probably all animals have some kind of natural rights, and maybe that some animals have more than others.
Yeah, and one of the interesting, it's a good summary. I think one of the interesting arguments that is made on behalf of animals is that if they have, in fact, the cognitive ability, in certain cases, let's say a 2-year-old, then they should have the rights of a 2-year-old,
Right.
which don't include the right to, own property or drive an automobile or what have you, but they do enjoy certain clear protections under the law.
That's right. I can't buy somebody's 3-year-old child and keep it in the closet. I'll go to prison for the rest of my life, as I should.
Right.
But yes, you're right. That 3-year-old child does not have the right to vote, does not have the right to drink alcohol, does not have the right to drive a car. There are all kinds of things. So it's not as if we don't already define and divide these things. There are all kinds of humans who are, human beings who are confined in mental institutions, or human beings who are severely disabled. There are all sorts of people who do not have, say, the responsibilities of citizenship, yet who we view as possessing basic human rights.
Yeah, and I guess, and we're talking with Andrew O'Hare, a writer for Salon.com. I guess when it comes to Stephen Wise and the Non-Human Rights Project, it's almost, to me, okay, I see that as almost kind of a slam dunk, and I know others will disagree, but I think, yes, they are beings, they have rights, they have a form of consciousness. To me, this is not, I know where I stand on that. The other guy you talk about, Wayne Pacelle, in the book The Humane Economy, which I have not read, I did read your piece and think, well, okay, he's done some great work, but oh God, another guy who thinks he's going to disrupt. The buzzwords of the Silicon Valley being applied to yet another problem or another, frontier of human change is almost more than I can bear. And I know that's probably really unfair, but that was my initial reaction. I wonder what your thoughts are on that.
Well, I had some of that reaction too. I had a real twofold reaction to that book, because on the one hand, you had the business school speak and the sort of Silicon Valley ideological agenda kind of drove me up the wall. He's really eager to avoid questions of whether animals have inherent rights, whether animals possess a consciousness which is similar to human consciousness, partly because he's devoted to working with what he would refer to as stakeholders, working with major corporations and so on. But the one thing you can say about that is that his approach has gotten certain things to happen that would have been very difficult to do through more sort of typical confrontational activist means. The fact that he convinced the pork industry to move away from confinement cages for sows with piglets, which they are almost all doing now, and the fact that he is beginning to have some success with the poultry industry in terms of moving away from those situations where you have 7 chickens crammed inside a tiny cage, all pooping on each other. Arguably, that's doing an immense amount for animal welfare. If we're going to house these food animals in more humane conditions, we have improved their lives immeasurably. Now, is that really the long-term answer to these questions on a philosophical level? I don't know about that, but certainly the fact that he's able to go into the CEO's office of Smithfield Foods, one of the biggest pork producers in the United States, and sit down and have a conversation with him where they're not going to let they're not going to let Stephen Wise or the head of PETA or somebody who they perceive as a radical in the door. And he's able to sit down and say to them, it makes market sense for you guys to treat the hogs better because that's what people want. And there's something to be said to that.
Yeah, there's logic to that. I have to say, my reaction to him, and I shouldn't judge him without reading the book, but, and maybe I will read the book, but my reaction to him is he has an ideology and wants to help animals at the same time. And that, look, I have a friend who I've had on the program a couple times who got Disney by organizing the Harry Potter Alliance of Harry Potter fans and people like that. He's gotten major film companies and other companies to stop using slave labor chocolate. just by going in and meeting with them. It's kind of similar, I think, to what Pacelli is doing.
Yeah.
And look, he's doing good. He's doing, and similarly, if animals get a better life because of what Pacelli is doing, I think that's great. But in supporting his work, I guess I would ask you: do you think we're also supporting this ideology that says the free market solves everything?
That does concern me, and I think that his book is probably, it's selective in the sense that it focuses on a number of campaigns that he and the Humane Society have worked on closely. Very recently, what was in the news is the Humane Society did a deal with SeaWorld. I'm sure you heard about this, where
Right.
they have agreed to end their theatrical shows involving orcas or killer whales, and also to stop breeding them, so that when the current whales that they own die off, they will not be replaced, and that industry is essentially going to go out of business, which is the big thing. But I know, for example, that some animal rights activists feel that that isn't going far enough, and it's not addressing some of the other problems with these kinds of ocean parks. And yeah, the extent to which a guy like Pacelli is putting his faith in that kind of like Adam Smith, the invisible hand of the market will cure everything. It was almost amusing in 2016, where we've seen, basically, an upsurge of populist resistance to that whole idea, and maybe a growing consciousness, especially after 2008, that the market cannot solve all problems and doesn't really have an inherent morality. And I do think Pacelli's kind of making the case that, if consumers are making moral choices, the market will follow them. And that's an interesting argument. I don't know that it's a foolproof argument, because, consumers do all kinds of things. There's all kinds of people still buy, McDonald's hamburgers by the billions and billions, So,
Right.
So I don't know how easy it is to just say, the market will correct for all these social ills. I am concerned about that, yes.
Right. The market might correct all these social ills if we could do a mass boycott of all meat products, let's say. But to get a mass boycott organized, you might need to use the media, which is going to be disinclined to report on that mass boycott, because the media depends on Burger King and McDonald's for advertising revenue. So, to me, that ultimately breaks down. And I guess, and Andrew O'Hare, I think you'll understand this line of concern too. I'm wondering the extent to which, okay, the orcas are getting freed at SeaWorld, and that was a horrific case of animal abuse, as anyone who saw, I guess it was Blackfish, I sometimes blank on it, understands. But I'm also worried about the animal equivalent of identity politics, where a kind of conservative economic agenda is paired with a symbolic assistance, as very few living beings are helped by the SeaWorld change at the end of the day. That I think we have to be careful about symbolic animal identity politics that prevents us from addressing the systemic problems that are causing the abuse of hundreds of millions of animals. Does that make sense to you?
Yeah, I think that's true. And I suppose the one thing that you can say for Pacelli and the Humane Society, I mean, to me, the argument that, as I see it, is like, given the economy that we have, what he's doing is probably a part of the puzzle. I think it's important to kind of be vigilant about paying attention to that model and how well it's actually doing what it says it's doing. But he has indeed tried to focus on some issues that are less charismatic. I mean, the statistics that I could find suggest that approximately 113 million hogs are butchered in the United States every year for pork products. And if he is successful in making sure that those pigs have better and healthier lives before they go to the slaughterhouse, that is an immense, improvement in a species that typically people haven't paid a lot of attention to. It's not that charismatic.
Right. No, I agree. So I think describing him as a piece of the puzzle is a great way to put it. And thanks for writing this piece, which counterposed two very interesting models and I think brought up an important subject. So Andrew O'Hare, staff writer for Salon, thanks for writing this and thanks for coming on the program.
Oh, thanks so much.